Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. I'm your host. Once again, bringing you another edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Very excited to get started with this one. A few days ago, the UFC announced that they would ring in a new era within the sport of mixed martial arts, adding the UFC women's featherweight weight class into the UFC, into the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Very exciting news, and it's been news that has been in the making for quite some time. The UFC had wanted to make a UFC women's featherweight weight class and build it around one fighter. But in the announcement a few days ago, announcing that at UFC 208 at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, the UFC announced that they would have a women's featherweight title fight in which Holly Holm would take on a fighter that I will probably butcher her name, but she's been around for quite some time, de Randamie. Both fighters have fought at bantamweight. Holly Holm, obviously the former women's bantamweight champion, and de Randamie fought the likes of Amanda Nunes at bantamweight. Amanda Nunes now the current bantamweight champion in the female division within the UFC. And I was shocked personally. I was, in my opinion, I was surprised. I am surprised that the UFC would build this weight class that was so. It was so many years in the making since the women's inception into the UFC. There were questions about whether the featherweight weight class would be added into the UFC, and there were rumors swirling around that they had offered the fight to Christine Cyborg Santos, the Invicta featherweight champion, one of the pioneers of women's MMA, and they did offer that fight to her 2 times. It came out recently that they did offer that fight to her 2 times, and that she did turn down the fight with Holly Holm. It would have been a Holly Holm, Christine Cyborg Santos fight for the women's featherweight championship. And I'm just shocked that Christine Cyborg Santos would turn it down after she had asked for the fight on several occasions during her mixed martial arts career, asked for the UFC to make this weight class, asked for the UFC to put her in this position, and she turned it down. I'm scratching my head at that, wondering why she would not take this fight, especially being that the opponent is somebody that knocked out Ronda Rousey, someone that is a huge name within the sport in Holly Holm. And the dream fight for a long time was Cyborg Santos versus Ronda, but Holly Holm kind of crushed that, so she would have been fighting the woman that kind of crushed her hopes at fighting Ronda Rousey. And in a woman like Holly Holm, she actually used Ronda Rousey's name as a launching pad for herself. So, perfect scenario for Christine Cyborg Santos, and she swung and she missed rather badly. Great opportunity for Holly Holm, great opportunity for the majority of the Invicta fighters fighting at featherweight that'll probably be merged with the UFC very shortly. Great opportunity for women's fighters in general to have another weight class to be a professional athlete within the number one mixed martial arts organization in the world. But a complete blown and missed opportunity by Christine Cyborg Santos. I anticipated that she would take this fight, and it was supposed to be one of the biggest women's fights of all time. Now, Holly Holm is fighting de Randamie, and I don't know if this fight will be much of a contest. As I mentioned earlier, de Randamie lost to Amanda Nunes at the UFC Fight for the Troops a couple years back. She has had her fair share of ups and downs, much like Holly Holm has had her fair share of ups and downs, but I just don't see de Randamie winning this fight by any stretch of the imagination. The only reason why I see this being an interesting fight is that de Randamie is a Dutch kickboxer, and obviously Holly Holm is a kickboxer and former boxing champion. So that's really the only reason why I see this being an exciting fight. But other than that, I think Holly Holm is well-versed in every aspect of the game in which de Randamie is well-versed. And for de Randamie to take this fight, there's more to gain than what there is to lose. Even if she loses the fight, she's supposed to lose this fight. Really, she's supposed to lose this fight. But now she's taking on Holly Holm. If she beats Holly Holm, that it's a huge opportunity for her as well. So opportunity is definitely in abundance here with this fight. De Randamie comes into the fight with a 7-3 record, 4 wins by knockout, 3 wins by decision. Her 3 losses are by way of knockout once, submission once, and decision once. And it's definitely interesting. She's coming off 2 wins over Larissa Pacheco and Anna Almos back in May and March of 2015. She hasn't been the most active fighter. She's fought 3 times in the last, what will be 4 years. So, very interesting choice by the UFC to put her in the inaugural title fight. Maybe they foresee plans down the road. First thing I thought when I heard about this fight was the fact that if Holly Holm wins this fight, she's the women's featherweight champion, the first female fighter to win a belt in 2 different weight classes. And if Ronda Rousey beats Amanda Nunes on December 30th, then that's the first order of business. If Ronda Rousey beats Amanda Nunes December 30th, and Holly Holm beats Jessica Randamie, then she definitely makes a case for you could definitely make a case for the UFC doing a champion versus champion fight, the first female champion versus champion fight. Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey 2 would probably be one of the biggest fights in UFC history, if not the biggest fight in UFC history already, as it was Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey 2 when Holly Holm was the bantamweight champion. That fight was going to be huge. But add in the wrinkle of a champion versus champion fight, featherweight champion in the UFC, bantamweight champion in the UFC. That's a dream best case scenario for Dana White and the UFC, and it will happen if those events do take place, and fighters like Juliana Pena and Valentina Shevchenko and the other fighters within the Invicta roster that'll be instilled into the UFC or installed in the UFC roster, they will be pissed off. They will be upset that they're not going to get this opportunity to take on Holly Holm or Ronda Rousey. But guess what? The UFC is a business. The UFC is following a business model, a money-making model, and these owners of WME and IMG, the WME IMG company, want to get back their investment on the UFC. They want to make up some ground of what they purchased the UFC for. They purchased the UFC for $4.2 billion, and they want to make some of that back. So they're going to put together the biggest fights possible, fights that might not make sense for the sake of sport, but will make sense for the sake of entertainment. And I can't wait to see what happens with this division, with the UFC featherweight division, with the UFC bantamweight division, and the women's divisions. It'll be very interesting. The bantamweight division has lost some luster, obviously, with the fact that the belt has kind of played musical chairs over the course of the last calendar year since Ronda Rousey lost her belt. But at the same time, I think that has made the division more compelling, more interesting to see what's next in that division. And fighters like former champion Miesha Tate are calling it quits. That leaves room for other fighters in this new era of mixed martial arts like Valentina Shevchenko to come in and stake her claim as she did in Holly Holm's last fight. Holly Holm has lost her last 2 fights since she beat Ronda Rousey. She's lost her last, she's lost every fight, I could say, her last 2 fights, but she's only fought twice since she beat Ronda Rousey. Once to Miesha Tate, obviously in her first title defense, and the second time to Valentina Shevchenko. Both fights, she looked very hesitant. She looked very unwilling to commit on her punches and kicks. Very much like Uriah Faber has looked in his most recent performances. Just too afraid to pull the trigger. And Holly Holm, when she was willing to pull the trigger, was a real threat to any woman that competed against her. And I'm very interested to see what Holly Holm shows up in this huge opportunity. This opportunity is a rare opportunity for a fighter that is coming off 2 consecutive losses, and Holly Holm needs to make the most of it. I thought that her career was kind of at a standstill. Now that the UFC added this featherweight division, I think this division will be better for her, physically, mentally speaking as well, knowing that she is going to kind of get a fresh start in a new division where she could be the champion in her first fight. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas. Tune in for part 2 at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, as I put together a list of the top 10 fights in the UFC that never happened. Take care.